Today I'd like to talk to you about the Semi-Slav defence and the various ways that you can get into it and how white might try and avoid it. This is the key position of the Semi-Slav defence, the defining position of the Semi-Slav. Black has this attractive little solid triangle of pawns around which we'll develop, so very solid in the centre. But in many lines of the Semi-Slav we're actually going to give up this centre and go for a queenside majority and try and, in a rather hyper-modern way, give white a big centre, but then spend the rest of the game knocking hell out of it. So, exciting stuff, and these some of these positions are amongst the most exciting and deeply researched in chess, proper grandmaster stuff. So anyhow, let's have a look at how to get into it. The most common way, I believe, is d4, d5, the Queen's Gambit, e6, heading to what we might call the orthodox defence, knight c3, knight f6, and now if white plays knight to f3, not necessarily the most common move here, but c6, and then we're into our Semi-Slav position. And, well, how does the game go from here? Well, there are two main moves here, e3 and bishop to g5. Let's have a look at e3 first, which is the most appealing one, I think, from black's point of view. Knight bd7, and after bishop to d3, white's spent a move with this bishop, and so we can take on c4. Making white move the bishop again, so they've actually kind of lost a move, even if we've given up the centre. And that is what makes this defence viable. Otherwise, it'd just be a very bad Queen's Gambit accepted. b5, bishop to d3. Usually, other moves are available, which are bishop to e2, the Capablanca variation, and bishop to b3, the Korchnoi variation. But bishop to d3 is the main line. And now usually black will play something like a6 and then go for this c5 move to hit back in the centre and or push forward to make a queenside majority. And the bishop usually comes to b7, and you can actually make these moves the other way around, play b7 first and then go for c5. But a6 makes a lot. b5 is a more useful. Bishop to b7 is a more useful move than a6 is, pointing a bishop towards the centre. But a6 obviously defends the b pawn, without which you're not going to be able to play c5. Lots of theory on it. Other moves here are available. There's b4, the London variation. Not so common, but quite fashionable these days. I think is this one, Sam Shankland's favourite. I think it's called the Sviagintsev variation. Apologies to that master if I've mispronounced the name. But bishop to b7 or a6 are the common moves here. Bishop to d3 and then taking on c4 is known as the Moran variation, and it's really the main reason why you want to play the Semi-Slav. I mean, there are other moves here for black on after bishop to d3. There's bishop to d6, the Chigorin variation, which is a bit dull, slight advantage for white. There's the Romy variation, which I really would like to make work, but I don't think I can. Slight advantage to white, but the Moran is exciting stuff, and you know, why not go for it? That's the main reason for why people want to play the Semi-Slav. Just going back to move 6, where white played bishop to d3, white can hold back with that bishop and play queen c2 and maybe some other moves like bishop to d2 and castles before touching the bishop, in which case you may need a slightly different plan. I don't think there's anything to be scared of, this anti-Moran system, but you will need something to play against it and learn the lines. The other way of playing after c6 is bishop to g5, and I think this is less appealing for black. I mean, just as a for instance, one of the main lines is the Botvinnik system, or the anti-Moran gambit, where we take on c4 not in order to make white lose a move with a bishop, but to make them lose a pawn. We're going to take that pawn and aim to keep it. e4 b5, e5. Are we losing a piece? Not quite. And now white temporarily sacrifices a piece, confident in the knowledge that they'll get it back. After knight bd7, g3 is the main line here. Bishop to b7, bishop to g2, queen to b6, and now takes on f6. I mean, other moves are possible throughout all of this, but this is the main line, and it's a little bit better for white. It's a mess. It's an exciting mess. White's pawn up. I mean, having called it a gambit, it's actually the black that loses the pawn, and you've got plenty of pawns on the queen side. And I think you're going to castle queen side, but that's not a terribly safe place for the king. There's lots of theory on it, very well studied position, but my sense is that black is kind of hanging on rather than doing well here, and it's not an appealing system to play. I think you'd have to sit down and learn a lot of theory, even if you did want to play it, and at the end of that theory it tells you that, well, you're a bit worse, which is not ideal. Anyhow, the Botvinnik anti-Moran gambit. Now, black didn't sit still for that for too long. They then came up with this move, h6, and if white plays as they might do normally, with takes on f6, and now takes on f6, this is known as the Moscow variation, and it's much more solid, much safer, not exciting by any means. But black comes out with about an even score here. There's a very, very slight advantage to white, maybe 56%, sorry, 51% over 49, I think, in games, whereas white would normally score 55% or more in the main line. So this is very solid for black, but not exciting. More exciting, if white wants to play it, is the go in the style of the Botvinnik variation, with this anti-Moscow gambit, tempting black to try and take on c4, and then we have this line e4, g5, bishop to g3, b5, very similar, but without this possibility of the knight taking on g5, bishop e2, and so on. So this is the main line position. And you know, black has a pawn, white has compensation. Do you fancy this for black? I mean, you're defending rather than attacking. I mean, if you like counter-attacking and you want to play the Semi-Slav for its counter-attacking possibilities, this is a position where you're going to defend for a little while against white's activity. It's equal. If you show this to Stockfish, Stockfish just says Blair, zeros. So white's got, but it's not flat. It's the white has exactly a pawn's worth of extra activity, and if you want like being active rather than defending, black of course has got long-term possibilities with the extra pawn or pressure on the centre, but at the moment it just feels like not a position that I'd want to play. If you fancy it, be my guest, but it's I wonder if there's other possibilities for counter-attack than this. White, just stepping back a second or two, after bishop to g5, there is one other possibility here for black, which is to play knight on b to d7, with the idea if white heaves a sigh of relief and goes for a standard Queen's Gambit sort of move, we've got queen a5, which is the Cambridge Springs defence. Black has plans of playing things like bishop to b4, knight to e4 with robust play, and that's not a bad way to play at all for black. Cambridge Springs. My impression is that white players are so terrified of black having any sort of activity that they're likely to avoid it, sometimes by playing a3, bless their little cotton socks, but more often as you meet better players, they'll play an exchange variation with c takes d5, e takes d5. Not the scariest version of the exchange variation to meet because the knight's on f3, not the best variation of the version of the exchange variation to meet because you've stopped yourself playing bishop to f5. This poor old bishop has a terrible life in the Queen's Gambit as a rule, and white having kindly opened up that diagonal, it's still not easy to develop it. But the exchange variation is a well-known way for white to avoid various things that black might be trying, and in particular, if you pick up a book, these many books that are around out there called Play the Queen's Gambit, Winning with the Queen's Gambit, lots of repertoire books are out there for white, and they all recommend that you play the exchange variation as white if you play the Queen's Gambit as white. It's a practical system. You get the same sorts of pawn structure all the time, and but I don't know how much fun it is for black to play. I mean, it's unbalanced. It's a game, and in fact, it's a game where black might look forward to some kingside chances based on this half-open e-file and attacking the white king. So if you're going to play any sort of dull variation of the Queen's Gambit against white, maybe the exchange variation is not the worst one to pick, because it does have an unbalanced position. So those are most of the main ways in which we get into the Semi-Slav, but let me tell you about some others. When we get to this Queen's Gambit position, you can play the full Slav, or at least go for it, because the main line of it is knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, and now e6 is our Semi-Slav. Now, on move 4 in the orthodox variation, knight f3 is possible, but it's not the most common move. The most common move I expect in that position is bishop to g5, keeping the possibility of maybe developing the knight on e2 in the exchange variation. But in the Slav move order, after knight f6 in this position, the most common move is knight to c3 by white, and so e6, getting into our Semi-Slav, is more common. You know, we can still play the exchange variation, but this is a better version for black, because white's not played the most scary version of the exchange variation they can play, but we do seem to have a possibility of getting our bishop to f5 much easier than in other lines. So the Slav move order may be the better one to getting into the Semi-Slav. Lastly, there is a Slav exchange variation, takes and takes, but this is a much less scary possibility for black to play than the other exchange variation. The exchange variation is bread and butter for white, the orthodox exchange, and many grandmasters use it as a sort of a source of income. It's the way they earn their living. Nobody earns their living with a Slav exchange. It's much more boring and symmetrical and easy to play for black than the mainline exchange. So I don't think this is anything to worry about for black. You will meet it, but I don't think it's scary. So I think the Slav move order is the one to get into the Semi-Slav if that's what you want to play, and why wouldn't you? So looking at playing the Moran system. Now I did think this might be the start of a whole series of videos that I might make on the Semi-Slav, but actually it's all been done. There's a splendid chap called, forgive my pronunciation, Stepan Tomic from Croatia, improving player, who's studying the hell out of chess and also making some cracking videos explaining how far he's got. And his favourite opening is the Semi-Slav, and he's made some nice little videos about them. They're nice and short and bite-sized and clear, but also they do get into the nitty-gritty about why one move order is better than another. So I do recommend him, and I'll put this in the notes. And also, so he has half a dozen videos on the Semi-Slav. There's 8 hours of video instruction from Jonathan Schrantz, who's been working with St. Louis Chess Club and Chess Centre, and he really does get into the weeds with the variation. So it's a lot more. I mean, Stefan might have produced an hour or so. Schrantz has produced 8 hours of worth on the Semi-Slav. So I don't think there's much I can add to these. What these fine gentlemen have offered. I'll start with Stepan's and move on to Jonathan's, and if you get stuck, give me a shout. Bye for now.